Hi, this is your instructor from the Human Anatomy and Physiology section of this channel. This is the first video in our three-part unit on the cardiovascular system. And in this unit, we're going to explore how the cardiovascular system works. In this video, we will focus on the heart. We'll learn its anatomy and physiology, including the electrical conduction system of the heart and the cardiac cycle. In subsequent videos, we will learn about blood flow through the heart and vessels and blood pressure. So let's begin with the heart's anatomy. The heart is a hollow, muscular organ located in the mediastinum in the thoracic cavity between the lungs. It's slightly tilted to the left, and the apex or pointed end rests on the left of the diaphragm. You can see the location of the heart here in this image of the mediastinum. Notice that the heart is anterior to the vertebral column and posterior to the sternum. The heart is also surrounded by a double-layered serous membrane called the pericardium, which anchors the heart in place and provides protection. The heart is divided into chambers. On the right side are the right atrium and right ventricle, and on the left side are the left atrium and left ventricle. Each chamber has a specific role in the function of the heart. The atria are the superior chambers, and there is one atrium on each side of the heart. These chambers receive blood returning to the heart. The ventricles are the inferior chambers, and they pump blood out of the heart to the rest of the body. The right ventricle pumps blood to the lungs, and the left ventricle pumps blood to the systemic circuit. You can also see that each chamber is divided by valves, which ensure that blood flows in only one direction through the heart. The right atrium receives blood returning from the body through three large veins: the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. Blood returning to the heart always flows back to the right atrium first. The coronary sinus is a large vein that drains blood from the heart muscle itself. So the oxygen-poor blood from the body and the oxygen-poor blood from the heart muscle all empty into the right atrium. After blood passes through the right atrium, it moves into the right ventricle via the tricuspid valve. From there, it is pumped through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery and to the lungs, where it picks up oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. The pulmonary veins then carry the now oxygen-rich blood back to the heart, this time to the left atrium. Blood in the left atrium comes from the lungs and from the coronary sinus, because the left atrium also receives blood from the heart muscle. The left atrium then passes blood through the mitral or bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, which is the thickest chamber of the heart. The left ventricle pumps the oxygen-rich blood through the aortic valve and into the aorta and to the rest of the body. As you can see, the chambers of the heart have a specific receiving and pumping pattern. The receiving side of the heart is the right side, and the pumping side of the heart is the left side. You may be wondering why the right side of the heart receives oxygen-poor blood and pumps it to the lungs to get oxygen, while the left side of the heart receives oxygen-rich blood from the lungs. Why doesn't the oxygen-poor blood just go to the left side of the heart and the oxygen-rich blood to the right side? Well, the reason is actually anatomical. The right side of the heart evolved to pump blood to the lungs because the lungs were initially located more anterior in the thoracic cavity. However, over time, the lungs migrated to their current position more inferiorly, and the right side of the heart adapted to pump blood to the lungs. The left side of the heart then became the more powerful side because it has to pump oxygenated blood to the entire body instead of just to the lungs. Let's move on to the heart's physiology. To understand how the heart functions, we will first need to learn about the cardiac muscle tissue. Like other muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue can contract and relax, but unlike skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle is autorhythmic, meaning that it can generate its own action potentials. This property is essential for the heart to function because the heart must continuously beat without any input from the nervous system. Autorhythmity allows the heart to maintain a steady rhythm of contractions. However, there are specialized cells within the heart known as pacemaker cells that have the ability to spontaneously generate action potentials faster than other cardiac muscle cells. These pacemaker cells are located in the right atrium in a region called the sinoatrial node, or SA node. The SA node is therefore referred to as the heart's pacemaker. Once the SA node generates an action potential, the signal spreads through the atria, causing them to contract. The action potential then reaches the atrioventricular node, or AV node, which is located in the floor of the right atrium near the interatrial septum. The AV node is a group of pacemaker cells that can fire action potentials at a slower rate than the SA node. This allows the atria to finish contracting before the ventricles begin contracting. The AV node also delays the signal slightly so that the atrial contraction is completed before the ventricular contraction begins. This coordinated contraction and relaxation of the heart chambers is called the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle begins with both the atria and ventricles relaxed. This is the diastole phase. During this time, blood flows into the atria and then to the ventricles. When the atria are full, they contract, pushing blood into the ventricles. At the same time, the AV node fires and the ventricles begin to fill. As the ventricles are filling, they become more pressurized until the pressure in the ventricles is greater than the pressure in the atria. The tricuspid and mitral valves are pushed open and blood flows from the atria to the ventricles. When the ventricles are full, the AV valves close to prevent backflow of blood into the atria. The increasing pressure in the ventricles also causes the aortic and pulmonary valves to open. The ventricles then contract, pushing blood out to the body and the lungs. This is the systole phase. When the ventricles are empty, the aortic and pulmonary valves close, and the cycle begins again. The cardiac cycle can be represented by a simple wave-like pattern on an electrocardiogram, or ECG. The ECG is a recording of the electrical activity of the heart over time. Let's review the key features of the ECG tracing. The P wave represents the atrial depolarization, or the electrical excitation of the atria. The QRS complex represents the ventricular depolarization, or the electrical excitation of the ventricles. The QT interval represents the entire ventricular cycle, from the beginning of ventricular depolarization to the end of ventricular repolarization. The straight segment is the period of time when the ventricles are contracting. The time between two successive waves is called the cardiac cycle. One cycle lasts approximately 0.8 seconds. You can also think of the cardiac cycle as consisting of 3 phases. During the isovolumetric contraction phase, all 4 valves are closed and the ventricles are completely closed. During this brief period, the ventricular volume remains constant. Ventricular pressure rises until it exceeds arterial pressure, forcing the aortic and pulmonary valves open. This continues until the isovolumetric relaxation phase, when the ventricles begin to relax. During this phase, the pressure in the ventricles drops below the pressure in the aorta and pulmonary artery, forcing the aortic and pulmonary valves to close. Blood from the aorta and pulmonary artery then flows back into the ventricles through the open atrioventricular valves. This is known as the flow of blood during diastole. Cardiac muscle has a unique property known as the Frank-Starling law of the heart. This law states that the force of contraction of the heart is dependent on the initial length of the muscle fibers. In other words, the more stretched cardiac muscle fibers are, the stronger the contraction. For example, if a person were to stand up after laying flat in bed, the force of gravity would pull blood down, away from the heart, causing the heart to stretch. This stretching would cause the heart to contract more forcefully, sending blood to the brain. To understand how cardiac muscle contracts, let's review the steps of muscle contraction. Muscle contraction begins with the binding of a motor neuron to a muscle cell at the neuromuscular junction. This binding releases acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter that stimulates muscle contraction. Acetylcholine binds to receptors on the muscle cell membrane, triggering a cascade of events that leads to the generation of an action potential. If the action potential reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it triggers the release of calcium ions. Calcium ions bind to troponin, which causes tropomyosin to shift and expose the myosin-binding sites on actin. Myosin heads then bind to actin, forming cross bridges. The myosin heads pivot, pulling the thin filaments toward the center of the sarcomer. This is called the power stroke. During the recovery stroke, ATP binds to the myosin head, releasing it from actin. The myosin head then hydrolyzes ATP, preparing for another contraction. Let's put all these concepts together and trace the pathway of blood flow through the heart. Deoxygenated blood from the body enters the right atrium via the superior and inferior vena cava. The blood then passes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Upon ventricular contraction, the blood is ejected through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery to the lungs, where it becomes oxygenated. Oxygenated blood returns to the heart via the pulmonary veins and enters the left atrium. The blood then passes through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. Upon ventricular contraction, the blood is ejected through the aortic valve into the aorta and to the rest of the body. In the next video, we lines build on this knowledge of the heart to learn about the electrical conduction system of the heart, the cardiac muscle, and the factors that influence heart rate and stroke volume. Check out this video on the lymphatic system or this video on the respiratory system. All the videos in the Human Anatomy and Physiology series are available on our site. If you enjoyed this video, check out our entire library of science and math videos. Thanks for watching.